What's up guys, it's Drac, and it's time to do a really important video for the nerfing community. Shout out to my mates down under who did a really good job of this video like 3 years ago-ish, maybe a little bit more, but that video is sadly super duper dated at this point. And the hobby is finally in a place where like these mods are stable enough that I want to talk about all the options, and I want to give you guys a linkable, clickable, savable video, something that you can revisit that will be a comprehensive mod guide for the most popular blaster to mod right now. The most popular flywheel blaster certainly is this, the Nerf Stryfe. Now, having personally done about 500 Stryfe mods in a variety of different shells, integrations, bodies, and goals, I think that I'm pretty qualified to talk about what makes a Stryfe mod solid, as well as what kind of options there are for this shell and for this platform in modern and easily accessible different price ranges and tiers. Somewhere along the line, the nerfing community picked up my personal internal tier system to define Stryfe mods. So for the purposes of this, we're going to be talking about how to build like a tier 2 Stryfe, which is one that has no ridiculous paint work on it, no LED work, no body work. Just how do you get rock solid internals to make your Stryfe shoot way harder than the 70 FPS that it shoots out of the box. Now, while the Stryfe is pretty ubiquitous and has been reskinned 100 different times into not only different shells entirely, but also different colors here, nothing beats a classic, so we will be doing our work inside the blue Elite Stryfe. And that means that there's going to be certain things inside here, like a dart jam, certain things inside here, like electronically, that might not be in your modern Stryfe, as Hasbro has made these cheaper and cheaper to manufacture over their almost 6-year run now. So with that said, let's go down to my workshop, let's crack this guy open, I'll give you a history of its biology, and then we'll talk about all of the different options, and then I'll show you how to install my personal favorite setup. For this Stryfe mod, you will need the following materials: a flywheel cage, 2 Nerf flywheels, 2 motors, a LiPo battery, 1 female XT60 connector, a couple small lengths of 4mm to 2mm color-coded heat shrink, a length of red and black silicon insulated wire, 1 21 amp micro switch, Phillips head screwdriver, wire snips, wire stripper, a soldering iron, and solder. So if you're new to modding, some of those materials might not be super familiar to you. That's okay, I've got a full explanation of what they are, their purpose, and where to find them. When picking your cage, it really comes down to price and performance threshold. If you just want something to perform, there are a variety of 3D printed cages made by a ton of different companies and available online as free STL files. Those will let you get whatever crush you're looking for whatever cage geometry you're looking for. However, being printed in predominantly PLA, they suffer from various heat warping and they're less reliable than other precision machined cages. Moving up the list, we have the Chinese variety of machined pot metal cages, which are things like the artifact cages and the worker cages. They really haven't found their stride yet in terms of spacing, canting, flywheel mating, etc. And so I don't highly recommend these, although there was a period of time where on a budget I was using artifact red cages because my motors tended to run hot. At the top end, we have a variety of precision machined metal flywheel cages, milled and CNC'd in the United States. There's everything from my personal Nix cage to the Typhoon, the Heston, and then out in Germany there's the Snickers cage. Lots of amazing options for very different flavors. The beating heart of this project is a Nix cage. Nix is my personal bespoke flywheel cages made down here in Augusta, Georgia. They are specifically spec'd for that 130 FPS range with events like HVZ and End War in mind. It's just a beautiful precision machined part made locally, packed with more features from my years of experience than any other cage on the market. I would never use anything else in this range. Flywheels are really tough to pin down in the market. While they all tend to float around the same price range, there are disasters to avoid, such as the metal flywheels coming out of China. While you might be tempted by the noise that they make, they just don't perform at all, and they have terrible coefficients of friction on foam projectiles. There are amazing options like the Containment Crew Cyclone in the United States, as well as things like the Bulldogs coming out of the UK, but for my money, I can't beat the Howlers. Obviously, to complement my Nix cage, we will be using Howler flywheels. I precision machine these as well to get guaranteed results out of the Nix cage, so every shot is identical. They have wonderful concavity and they make a beautiful noise, but most importantly, they're made of the right material, which is to say that they are white acetal, which is very comparable to Delrin. Alright, so there are a variety of motor options on the market. There are the particularly large 180 size motors, such as these XP180s, which are largely extinct, and then there's the more popular 130 size, which require no shell cutting in a variety of flywheel blasters. I favor the Fang revamped, but I also want to point out that there are Michel 2.0s, which are a very inexpensive, like great budget option for aftermarket motors. They do pretty much everything that you need them to do at a lower price point with slightly lower performance in all metrics. In this build, I'm using Fang revamped motors. Not only are they named after a really cool nerfer, but they are also very robust, very powerful motors at a very fair price. They have neodymium sintered magnets. They've got plenty of torque to handle all of your builds, and most importantly, they run off of 2S, which is the ideal battery, in my opinion, for Stryfe builds. So I really like all of the options that they give us, and they give us those options in a 130 sized package, which means no shell cutting. So there are plenty of options in LiPo world for how to power your Nerf mod, but for Stryfe specifically, you tend to float between the 2 and 3S range, which is to say the number of cells per pack. Most Stryfe and Nerf applications utilize what is known as an XT60 connector, which is a standard that more than meets our current and heat requirements. And then you've got to talk about milliamp hours, which ultimately determines how many shots you're going to get out of your blaster and how long you're going to be able to rev for. But you also have to wrestle with milliamp hours, because while more is better, less lets you fit into smaller spaces. The Stryfe having a powerfully small quad AA space to fill, I have preferences, but extended battery doors exist on the market from a litany of different providers, letting you expand as far as you realistically want to go. This build is powered by a 0.95 milliamp hour 65C discharge 2S graphene LiPo battery. It's remarkably affordable, it's really easy to change the leads over to an XT60 connector, and it delivers all of the current that we need to power both of our Fang motors. It's a powerful, robust option that fits inside a stock Stryfe battery tray with no additional cutting or battery doors required. So the wire that I use is 18 gauge silicone insulated threaded wire. The threading is important for how I like to solder up to NASA specifications, and the silicone insulation makes sure that I never get shorts in my circuit. In addition to that, it's particularly inexpensive, and that gauge wire handles all the currents that I've ever thrown at it. Some people mistakenly believe that you should go up to 16 gauge. I think that having a slightly thinner wire makes it a lot easier to fit into shell cavities. For the longest time, I was using a combination of epoxy putty and polysilicate to set my switches into the handles. The higher microamp switch is essential for the blaster build. However, recently 3D printed switch plates have come out onto the market, and they just make the process completely stupid proof. This 21 amp micro switch is essential for the build because it's going to allow us to conduct the kind of amperage that we're drawing through that battery to these motors safely without burning out the tiny spring in the stock Nerf switch. You will need a Phillips head screwdriver to crack open the shell, a wire stripper, and a set of snips to splice all of your wires and connections, and a soldering iron to chemically connect those electronically. So now that you've researched, hopefully, and gathered all of your materials, it's time to install them in your Stryfe. Your first step is the removal of all 14 Phillips head screws, then clamshell. Inside we have essential parts that we will keep in our build. Those include our bandolier attachment points, our rev switch, our trigger, our thrower arm, our magazine release setup, this bit that protects the wires between the motors and the battery, and then the muzzle. Everything else is superfluous. So to show you what it looks like when only essentials are in here, it looks like, so these are the components that are coming out. They're a variety of electronic and physical locks, as well as a cage that is unnecessary and switches that are very subpar. The only exception is this plate, which keeps the mag well clean. Once you've removed all the garbage underneath it, you can go ahead and set it back in its place with no consequence. However, you're going to want to remove all of these pieces, set them off to the side as you work on the shell. This is the part where if you wanted to take this to a tier 1 or a tier 0 build, you would sand this thing down into its entirety, wet sand it, prime it, paint it, and get it ready for some glorious destiny. However, for the purposes of our build, we're just going to focus on installing our top tier components into this shell, beginning with the battery tray modifications. To augment the battery tray, you're going to have to remove the battery door and make space for your LiPo battery. As you can see right now, it's set up for 4 AA's, and that simply won't do. So with a fully deribbed battery door, as well as a fully gutted battery space. You can see the Graphene 950 fits beautifully into this area. I'm very happy with that. It's time to move on to the internals themselves, starting not with the Stryfe itself, but with building this from a series of components into what I like to call a flywheel cage heart, which is the combination of wheels and motors wired up and perfectly tuned. Let's go. Here we are just placing our motors into the motor ports on our flywheel cage, making sure that that red cathode indicator is facing towards the dart guide on the top motor, and then we will flip that notation for the bottom motor, just locking them in with machine screws on the opposite side. These flywheel setting screws are part of what makes Project Nix so very special. By offsetting it by an exact science on each side, you get perfectly aligned flywheels and guaranteed performance every time. Here we are stripping out a specific length of our 18 gauge silicone threaded wire and then making a hole in the center thread. Then we're going to pull that out into what I like to call a trident, 3 separate strands, and then weave the strands through the leads onto the motor, twisting them together, and then of course chemically fastening the entire system using capillary action soldering. This is what's known as NASA grade soldering, where it is both mechanically and chemically sound and structurally ready to go. Of course, we will also be doing our primary lead wire through that center hole we made earlier. We will then heat shrink that later on, but that's going to lead to the rest of the electronic components in our shell. Very similar soldering style. And voila, one perfectly soldered cage. But before we move on, testing. Now that you've built your heart, it's time to start putting components back. If you'll notice, I pulled the leads up and out above the dart guide because that's about the direction they're going to go in the shell. That'll make sense in a minute. So as always, front to back. Luckily the Nix cage was designed with mating to the Stryfe muzzle in mind. Make sure you save the 4 screws that originally held in your stock flywheel cage to lock in your new cage. Why waste? Press your threaded wire into the original channel and you are good to lock it down with the original piece. This is where I like to get a little cute. I like to utilize the original shell lines and make a quick incision here and here to run my hot lead down to my switch this way. To use any higher gauge switch here, we're going to have to carve out portions of this. Fortunately, by just lining up our 3D printed insert, we can kind of get a feel for where we're going to have to dig out material. So a super important step here is now that our channel is clean, we're just going to add a little bit of super glue and set in our switch plate. Doesn't matter what color it's printed in because it's never going to be visible. Well, that sets on our switch. We only need the nominal open. We have no need for the nominal close. So just to be safe, we can pop it off. That's the terminal closest to this bit. Here we're simply running our hot lead coming from the motors through the switch all the way up to the battery's cathode. Super simple, soldering the same way we did the motors. All wired up. Still nice and clicky. Let's go. Alright, so with everything on this side of the shell wired up, it's time to start adding back in our components. However, I want to mention a few things. While some things are simple, like adding back in your bandolier attachment points exactly where you pulled them out, some things are slightly more complicated, like the entire fit and finish of your rev switch now has some additional players in the game, which is to say, you have to choose if you want to add this back, and if you do wish to add it back, you're going to have to omit some pieces, such as all little pins along the way here. This guy, and this guy. If you chose to wire up my way, you're going to want to add this plate back. Orientation is important. And if you're feeling a little bit tactical, there's nothing at all wrong with the stock mag release, but you could always grease up a third-party aftermarket 3D printed one and have something just as nice but a little bit extended. This one in particular comes to us from Reciprocation Props. Don't forget to pull your leads through a hole that you make in that battery compartment. This is going to be really important in a minute. Last steps, throw our arm, another dab of grease, and don't forget this bit. At this point, you're ready to put the shell back together, but there's still going to be one thing to do afterwards. The final step is going to be to splice our XT60 female connector into these leads. As a special trick, if you want to avoid any unnecessary melting, all you have to do is put a male connector in it while you're working on it. This won't affect your actual splice, but it will make the whole process a lot safer and more comfortable for you. One last big trick is give these leads plenty of time before you add your heat shrink. Now again, there are a variety of options, including 3D printed extended battery trays for larger batteries, as well as specific PC thumb screws work really great for removing any need for a screwdriver in the future. And there you go, fully overhauled Stryfe. Alright, so that is obviously super duper increased performance. What you can't tell inside this range is that it's also ridiculously improved accuracy. However, the overall guide is designed to bring you up to speed and teach you everything that you need to know to build any kind of Stryfe, not just this one specifically. This is how I do the majority of my builds nowadays, but the principles are the most important thing here. They are basics of electrical engineering and mechanical engineering that teach you how to completely replace these components and take something that's ultimately a toy and turn it into a piece of sporting equipment. That's right, I went there, haters. I want to thank you guys for watching. I sincerely hope that you learned something. My intention was to create not a guide for people who are veteran Nerf modders, but instead a video that you can send to people asking questions that's both easy to understand visually and audibly. The intention here is to teach, not necessarily to show off that I can make a super sweet Stryfe mod in a day. Again, for your convenience and because it supports the channel and helps me make super editing intensive content like this that otherwise does not perform very well, all links to all components are in the description box below. Any Amazon link supports the channel and my personal dreams, and any of my friends' links such as Out of Darts or Foam Blast or Containment Crew support the dreams of my friends. There are not a lot of people making a living off of this hobby, and it's easier when you buy from the right people. Thank you guys very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. Even more hopefully you learned something. As always, much love, Nerf on, Drac out.